Welcome to this week's Youth Innovation Forum, where we are so excited to have Angela, a senior consultant at Deloitte, going into Stanford grad school, join us today and talk about instructiv, your venture, and also how you all can get your careers kickstarted and share her advice from that experience. So I'll give you all a couple of minutes just to join in. We already have quite a big list already. So let's just jump into this. All right. So Angela has such an impressive background. I don't know if I can do it justice, but I'm going to try my best to talk her in and get you all caught up to why she's so freaking amazing, because she is pretty freaking amazing. So Angela is the founder of Instructive. She is an ex-consultant at Deloitte, going to graduate from Stanford in 2023, and she is a Penn and Wharton student. And fun fact, we are actually double alumni from the same high school and university, so that's pretty cool. And Angela is so awesome. She just loves inspiring and empowering students and also new graduates. As a part of this, she founded Instructive, which is a social enterprise that supports students to get their dream job and excel in their role, no matter their academic or socioeconomic background. Previously, she was a management consultant focused on transforming the public sector to ensure equitable access to services. So we will be covering Angela's time in consulting and her secrets for how you can start your career off on the right foot. Angela, you've had an incredibly successful life and career, and we are so glad to welcome you today. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. Definitely like you said before in your introduction, one of my biggest passions is to help students and help new grads actually get into the jobs they like. And once they're there, make the most out of their time there. So definitely really excited for this session and really happy to answer any and all of your questions.
Awesome. Let's dive right in. So we have a broad audience here. Lots of university students and also high school students who are A, interested in consulting, and B, just want to know how to jumpstart into their career life and get off on the right foot. So to give everyone kind of a bit of an introduction on even what consulting is for those who aren't familiar, um, first of all, let's take a look at who in the audience um, is familiar with consulting. So who who is um who is familiar with consulting? Like, on the screen, you should see a poll, yes or no. And then while you guys are answering that, let's ask Angela, what does a consultant do? What is that like?
Yeah, so I would say that in literally the most simplest terms, a consultant is just someone who solves problems, typically business problems for clients. And clients can include anyone from the private sector, the public sector, and also the nonprofit sector. So for me personally, I've worked across all three. And typically these business problems, they range anywhere from strategy, so like new market entry, to operations. So how do I organize a particular team? How do I modernize a particular group? And it can also range to implementation. So one of the really big and hot topics right now in consulting is definitely tech implementation. So taking the old systems that you have and making sure that you're future ready. And I would say that big combination of the three, so strategy, operations, and technology, form really much the basis of consulting here and now.
Perfect. And thank you for giving us that explanation, because it looks like 40% of the audience doesn't yet know what consulting is. So thank you for letting us know and filling us in.
Of
Um,
course.
so tell us more about how you got into this. Why and when did you become a consultant, and how did you get started?
Yeah, so I became a consultant right after graduation, and oops, there's a pop up, and I joined Deloitte Canada right after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania in 2017. I would say that my path into consulting was a little convoluted, or I didn't want to become a consultant in the very beginning. I actually wanted to be an NGO field worker, but that did not turn out that way. So in my first year, I actually joined this organization called Penn International Business Volunteers with the aim of helping international NGOs. It eventually evolved into essentially impact consulting, Penn International Impact Consulting, and I helped them, or I helped various NGOs through them. So for example, I helped an internationally ranked Jordanian NGO to really broaden up their scope internationally. And I helped a Thai women's empowerment NGO to evaluate their impact and to gain more public sponsors for their operations. And eventually I became the president of that organization. And I realized that, hey, maybe it's not just working in the nonprofit sector or the government sector that I want. So it's actually the problem solving and the impact creation and the working in teams and working for people that I actually truly enjoy. So from that moment onwards, essentially that realization for me in fourth year, so senior year in university, I decided that, hey, maybe I should recruit for consulting instead of going directly into working with NGOs, although that's always a passion that I've had. Clearly it's come out when I founded Instructiv last year. And I would say that was my very, very slow transition into working as a consultant.
It's awesome, and I love how you're able to share the journey and the whole story there. And it was really a process of you discovering what you are interested in and narrowing that down. And I think that's a common thing that a lot of high school and university students are thinking about and
Mm-hmm.
worried about. You often feel like you
Mm-hmm.
need to have it figured out. You need to know what you want to do. So I think it's really cool to see. It is a journey.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any
Yeah.
suggestions for high school or university students for how they can get better at asking the questions and exploring and get and moving along that journey?
Yeah, I would say that it's two things, right? The first one is having a general idea of what you might want to explore. So for me, it's always about creating impact and helping people, whether it's from a small NGO or it's for like a big public sector client. So that was always at the core of what I wanted to do. I think once you understand your like life and career guiding principles, it becomes a little easier to understand what do I want my next career move to be. And it really helps to think of it not from me right now and I want to plan out every single career move until like the time I retire. It's much easier to think about, hey, this is the next job I want to do. This is the next project I want to do, and then build on that step by step. The second thing is, I find that I was a little guilty of it, and a lot of mentees that I have are also quite guilty of it now, is once they have a particular vision in mind, they say no to every single other opportunity that comes their way because they want to be laser focused. But the thing is, if I didn't try out different things, then I wouldn't be where I am today. And I definitely think that the experiences I've gained in consulting, they have been truly life-changing, from changing the way that I think, to changing the way that I present myself and speak, to the network that I now have and the people that I now know. So definitely, if I have to boil it down to two things, it's understanding your core guiding principles and values. And then after that, saying yes to different opportunities that come your way so you can actually try out these try out activities to see if they actually align with your values or not in reality.
And I really love. I want to dive even more into the first point, which is understanding your core values and principles. Um, First of all, let's talk about what those are for you and how you decided on those values and principles.
Yeah, like I think for me, it's like it literally just boils down to helping people and sharing the knowledge that I have. Ever since like middle school and high school, I actually founded an NGO in high school as well to help immigrants adapt to Canada because I myself was an immigrant. I guess I still am. And I had a particularly difficult time because when I arrived in Canada, I actually didn't speak any English at all. And there wasn't really a robust ESL program. So for me, founding that NGO at that time was to prevent people in similar situations as me from struggling as much as I did. And then that has really continued throughout my time at Deloitte. And then now, because at Deloitte, like I wasn't just working on different public sector projects, although that's like as close as you can get client-wise. I was also working a lot on nonprofit projects for Deloitte. So for example, while I was a consultant there, I was also a nonprofit project manager, and that was really fun. I got to help out lots of organizations. One in particular was this homelessness prevention charity that was trying to go national to figure out what they're supposed to do. And now it's instructive too. One of the things that I myself struggled with when I first started out in consulting is that it's very nebulous to get into consulting. And then once you're there in consulting, you don't really know what you're supposed to be doing in order to succeed. And this is this is despite me coming from Wharton with such an established alumni base, coming from obviously UTS as well, where we have such established alumni. So if someone who is as privileged as me still struggled so much in this role, how do I prevent people from going through a similar experience and going through it alone by themselves? So I think that definitely helping people and trying to create impact, a deep impact for people that I'm able to support is just such an important principle to me.
Right, and I think that's a great segue into the next question I'm going to ask you and our audience. Is there somebody who in your life who inspires you to move along that path?
Yeah, I think that I truly draw inspiration from so many people in my life. I would say, you know, this is very well because we've talked a lot in the past, but one of my favorite things to do is to just have coffee chats and network with people because I love hearing about their stories, how they got to the place that they are right now and seeing where they want to go. I think that if we're talking about one person in particular that's truly made an impact on me and really inspires me is actually my mentor from work, Scott. And I've known him for about 2.5 years now. And in this time, I think that I've just continued to be so deeply inspired by him and his life story. So one of the things that I personally struggle a lot with, although it doesn't seem apparent at first, is I actually feel very lost at times. I think that to the public, it seems like I have a very straight and narrow trajectory where I'm going up and up. But truthfully, I do a lot of self exploration, trying to figure out, like, hey, are the things I'm doing right now truly aligned with my values? And the reason that Scott really inspires me is because in his 20 or odd year career, he's done so many things. He was in the military, he was a political advisor, he was an art salesperson, he worked in iBanking, he worked in consulting, and now he works for big tech. And I think that seeing someone who has transitioned so much and really followed their passions and it's still so successful, it really gives me a lot of hope in understanding that I can pivot. I can explore what I want to explore as long as it aligns with my core values. I can do things that energizes me and makes me feel comfortable and drives me to be the best version of me that I can be. And in at the same time as doing that, also continuing to give back to community, to mentor others, to do the things that are very core to who I am, so that although I'm moving forward and becoming a new me, I'm still retaining onto the things that I hold true.
Right, and I think that's so cool, just the process of being able to reflect and constantly ask yourself, is what I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing aligned with my core values and principles? And being okay to pivot and
Yeah.
being okay if the answer is no sometimes and make the right
Mm-hmm.
decision. And I have a feeling we'll dive even more into that when we talk about your decision to go to grad school.
Right.
We'll leave that for later. Let's talk more about your experience getting started in corporate, because I'm going to ask the audience this. Um, but I presume there are a good number of people who are trying to break in to the corporate job market now. So tell us about what that experience was like for you at the very beginning, and what was it like to navigate that?
Yeah, I would say I had a atypical, I guess, recruitment experience in the sense that I actually originally signed with a very boutique firm doing exactly what I wanted to do as my dream job in the States. But because of, well, essentially the administration change, there were some immigration changes. And because of that, I actually lost my job even before I started. So I went back to all the companies that were looking for new hires and gave me offers in the past and asked them like, hey, I know I said no to you before, but can you actually encourage me to come back? And that's how I actually reapplied through non-OCR, so on-campus recruitment, to get the job I do have now. So my little entrance to consulting was a little different. And I think because of that sidestep, I actually ended up in the team that was more like a second or third choice versus my first choice, which is public sector consulting. And instead I ended up in the retail team. So for that, my first couple of months, I will say, was less than ideal, in the sense that I was putting in a lot of hours. Of course, onboarding into consulting is very difficult because coming in as a new graduate, you don't really understand how much attention to detail you must be paying, how to critically analyze something, how to really adopt that problem-solving framework, how to tell a story well, how to communicate with the clients, so on and so forth. When you're onboarding and working so hard already, and you're doing a job that you don't necessarily enjoy, because I wasn't true to my values at that point, by being in a private sector team instead of a public sector team where I got to make direct impacts on Canadian citizens, it really hammered away at essentially my soul and my well-being. So from very early on at my time at Deloitte, my emphasis was always about pivoting to the public sector. And I did that through, well, essentially networking, telling everyone and anyone I could about my past experiences running Penn International Impact Consulting, helping different NGOs, about the courses I was studying at Penn and how I can be a good fit for their team. So about 9 months into my time at Deloitte, that chance actually materialized for me. So I got to switch teams without even applying or without doing any tests. And I got to switch into our think tank, which is the Future of Canada Center. I had a great time there, but I realized that my passion is for public sector and public sector problem solving. And what the FCC does is more research oriented or policy analysis oriented. So I knew I wanted to go back into public sector consulting. So again, I went to actually networking and contributing value. So I led a couple of very big bids during that time, like multi-million-dollar bids, and I helped our team to win it. Then after we won it, I helped to build up the team that was going to staff it from the ground up. So because I was able to contribute value while staying true to who I am and what I want to do, I actually moved essentially all 3 teams to get to where I want right now. And since I moved, I would say that my career just really took off. Since I moved to the public sector transformation team, I was able to become an internship coordinator for Deloitte's entire Toronto office. I was able to become the hiring manager for my team. And that's probably where a lot of you guys know me, because after I became that, I started posting a lot about how can you actually get into consulting. And I would say the most important, or the most personally touching fact for me, is that I really went from just like a cog in the machine at Deloitte when I first started after graduation, to working on literally defining the Deloitte strategy, working with the board of directors, working with the management partners, so on and so forth. And that was just such an eye-opening and life-changing experience for me.
And I think the part that I really love, and I'd love to highlight, is that the one big theme here is that I think you were always open to talk and ask, right? Put your foot out there, put yourself out there, and get what you wanted. So I think for a lot of people, that's a really scary proposition, to move outside of the conventional like application route and hit against the walls a little bit. So for people in that situation who might be a little bit wary of doing that, how would you advise them?
Yeah, I would say the mentality that I always espouse is that if you don't ask, the answer is always no. If you ask, the answer is probably no, like 95% of the time. But there's still that 5% of the time where it could be a yes. And the other thing I would mention is that it pays off to have patience. The changes didn't happen overnight for me. From beginning to end, it took me 2.5 years to move into a team that I really, really wanted to be in from day one. And I had to have multiple jumping and pivot points. I think there's a really nice illustration that Adam Grant shared a little while ago that shows your career in like a linear line. But then once you actually look at it, there's so many up and downs. And I would say that I think because obviously like when we talk about ourselves or when we send stuff on LinkedIn or on social media, it's very much showing that linear line of these are all the accomplishments that I have. But during these talks that I have, I always try to be as honest as I can about what are my ups and what are my downs and how do I actually get to that progression, because like I'm only human, right? So there's obviously so many ups, obviously, but also a lot of downs that you have to fight through and be patient while you're fighting through them in order to really get what you want. So like I worked through it, you guys will probably work through it, and every successful person has also worked through it. So when you're reaching out and you're trying to get whatever is on your career or personal bucket list, keep that in mind. Everyone pretty much knows where you're coming from because they've been in that situation themselves too. So if you change your perspective a little bit when you're trying to do the cold outreach or when you're trying to pitch yourself for a role, then it really helps to calm your nerves and shift your mindset from almost like a defeatist, this won't work out for me, to a more positive mindset that usually yields better returns.
Right, even if it's a 5% success rate, it's still a
Mm-hmm.
5% success rate, right?
Yes.
And like if like you said, I can say it any better. If you don't ask, it's a no. So
Right.
I
Mm-hmm.
think even for high school students, even when I was in high school, that was something that just worked out for me as well. Like getting internships for whatever company I wanted, it was
Mm-hmm.
always asking. And even if the odds were against me, I was very surprised to see that I got offers that I never thought I would have, like from Microsoft
Mm-hmm.
and other things like that. And the one thing that I did personally was ask, like exactly what you said. Um, so I think that's a really, really cool theme and commonality that you pointed out.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like we are just one person. So we can only take one offer or one opportunity that comes to us, right? A lot of times I think people are very worried about like, how do I get the maximum number of offers so I have the most choice? But really at the end of the day, it's about like finding that perfect fit for you, right? Like where is the opportunity that you want to go to that works out well, both with what you're looking for and you're also a good fit into a team. So when you're growing together in the role, you're getting more opportunities and you're delivering more value and getting more value in return as well. So I think that definitely like by thinking more so in a positive like abundance mindset almost, it really helps students out and it's really helped me out when thinking about hey, like what are all these things that I should be trying to go for and what do I really want to do.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing that insight. Now, I'd love to open the floor to someone from the audience to ask a question a little bit more specific to consulting. Zoe Zhang, who sh- you should have talking permission enabled, so you should be able to ask your questions.
Yeah, can you hear me right now?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Angela. So my question is, what are the common attributes of consultants that excel at their field?
Yeah, so I would say there's so many. I'm going to boil it down to three. I think the three that are definitely like on my mind, it's like almost like a little Venn diagram. The first one is definitely you have to be competent. So as a consultant, you have clients are paying top dollars and you're typically working on very high impact, important projects for whatever clients engage you. So whatever you're doing, you have to be very good at it, whether it's making PowerPoints and you want to pay supreme attention to detail so everything's aligned perfectly or everything's grammatically correct. Or if you're crunching numbers, you want to make sure that, hey, like all of this analysis is backing up the hypothesis that we are showing to the client. I think that a lot of times when students first make that transition from university to consulting, they actually struggle a lot with the competence part, not because they're not smart. I think everyone is extremely intelligent and hardworking and willing to learn in consulting, but rather they don't know the right way to do it. So demonstrating competence and also being perceived as competent by your peers and by your managers is definitely one of the most important parts of doing well in consulting. The second big bucket I would say is commitment. So think of commitment not in terms of like how many hours are you putting in, are you staying latest at the office, so on and so forth, but more so as in, are you a good team player? If there's a lot of work coming down the pipeline, are you putting your hand up and saying, hey, like I will do this because I'm good at it, and I will also try to take that because I know that working together we can deliver a result faster, stronger, better, so on and so forth. And the last bucket I would say is culture fit, if I want to go with 3 C's, because when you think about it, consulting is 100% a team sport. You're working with teams to help your client, but you're also working with your client as like a mixed team. So when it boils down to it, it's really important to have the same values, to have the same respect, to have the same integrity that you have for each other. And when I say that there's a culture fit, that doesn't mean that you have to be like great buddies outside of work or that you have to have the same hobbies. It's more so, do I have that mutual respect going on between me and my colleagues and my managers? Can my manager trust me? Do I trust them to really have my back? So on and so forth.
Right. And we just got a question in from Derek Lee, kind of bouncing off of this line of thought, I think more on the competence bucket. But Derek asks, what are some important skills that you would need as a consultant?
Yeah, so the core consulting skills, I get asked this a lot, are the same from when you're trying to get into consulting to when you're actually a consultant. And they just boil down to the following. There's a full list on the Join Instructive Instagram page, so I will link that to you guys later. But off the top of my head, the most important ones, in my personal opinion, and also from both like a performance standpoint and also a recruitment standpoint, is critical analysis, problem solving. So those are the core skills, I would say, for consultants. Data analysis as well into that bucket. And then you think about the team working skills. So teamwork, leadership, ownership. So if something comes your way, can you do it from beginning to end? And in that bucket as well, I would put client readiness or essentially professionalism. So a lot of consultants are really young, right? When you go into the client site, though, the client is again paying top bucks, so they want top results. So how do you, someone who's fresh out of university, seem professional and competent enough to the client that they're happy about the work that you're delivering? And I would say that the last bucket really just boils down to, again, like more so a mix of the commitment and the culture fit as well. How good are you at being a team player, at picking up the slack, at doing more, at storytelling well, so on and so forth. I think that when you're thinking about consulting, there are so many like ancillary or auxiliary skills that you could have that would make you a more competitive candidate. So for example, if it's a supply chain team, do you have an engineering background? If it's a healthcare team, have you worked in healthcare before? If it's a strategy and innovation team, have you had a startup or were you an entrepreneur and you understand what innovation means? But when it really boils down to it, the core skills that I talked about before are the most important ones to get you into consulting. And then once you're a consultant, to help you move to a next level and truly excel in the role.
And one question kind of from me, just out of curiosity. So you mentioned storytelling, the skill of storytelling. Can you elaborate on what you mean and how to cultivate it?
Yes. So cultivating storytelling, I'll start with the second part first. Cultivating storytelling is very much through practice. When I first started at the firm, I wasn't very good at storytelling because I couldn't really understand how to string everything together and to be confident enough to present it in a way that made sense to the client. What storytelling really boils down to is 2 things. Number one is how can you make sure that the data that you have, you can transform that into a coherent story. So you're not just presenting random numbers on the page, or you're just having a graph on the page. You're accompanying that with detailed insights that you've gotten from other portions of your analysis, so you can really tell the client what's going on with their organization and how they can improve it. The second part is obviously, how do you convey that information? It's not just enough to translate it from data to story, but it's also about how do you share that story with your audience. In most cases, this is your team when you're trying to perfect a draft, or the client when you're actually presenting the presentation to them in the end. And definitely, like I said before, the biggest part is just practice, practice, practice. When I first got into the firm, I used to like shake like crazy before I had to go and present. And I felt like I was always stumbling on my words. But now, 4 years into the role, I feel just so confident talking to clients, even if I don't 100% know what's going on, I understand what to say. Like, can we take this back? Could we revisit another day? So that I always keep the client readiness and the professionalism portion there, while also maintaining the integrity of the story.
Right. And you mentioned like, the anxiety around presenting sometimes. And I think thank you for sharing that and being open about that, because that's something that a good amount of people face, if not most people. So how did you work to overcome that and get better over time?
I think the most natural part was just gaining confidence in myself and my, I guess, ability in the role. I personally think a lot of my anxiety stems from imposter syndrome, in the sense that I feel like I'm not good enough to be there in the room, because it's really paradoxical. Because I am quite great as a consultant, I was promoted early, I went on a lot of different comments, I worked with very high level people at Deloitte, like I mentioned before. That put me in a lot of situations where I was the youngest in the room by far, like at least 10, sometimes even 20 years, or I'm the only woman in the room, or I'm the only Asian American in the room. And it put me in a very self-imposed, weird spot, in the sense that I felt like I not only had to represent myself and make sure that I sound eloquent, but also represent the entire community that I happen to be presenting there. So there was a lot of self-imposed anxiety from the start. But I would say that the more I was in those settings and the more that I excelled in those settings, the less I felt scared about being in those settings to begin with. And definitely being honest about the way I feel to my managers and to my peers has really helped me. I think maybe it's particular to me, maybe other people feel it too on this call, but the more I pretend something is okay, the worse I actually feel about it. But by sharing that, hey, I'm actually kind of nervous about this presentation, or hey, even better, like, I know that I will have a stumbling block here when I'm practicing this presentation. If that happens to me, colleague, can you please make sure to jump in and share X data point? And by having essentially like saviors or like lifesavers in the room when I'm doing those presentations, it's really helped me to calm my nerves and to, well, essentially perform better in the end.
Right. And I love how it always ties back to just being authentic, being yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We have a great comment from Cheryl, like pointing that out exactly, the importance of authenticity and helping us build better relationships with our teams, but also overcome those roadblocks. So thank you so much for sharing that and being authentic with us as well.
Of course. Yeah, I think authenticity is just so important, not in terms of just like you being you and then you feeling comfortable, but also in the like the role modeling that you're doing for others. I'm personally very conscious of the fact that in my company, I am seen as a mentor, I am seen as a leader, especially for new hires that come in. So how do I, by being realistic, by being honest, by being truthful, help to carve out a better path for them, so that when they're feeling nervous or stressed or down or feeling overwhelmed, they feel comfortable sharing that instead of essentially suffering in silence, and also delivering a worse quality product in the end because they didn't have the help they needed.
Right. Yeah. And I see a question coming in from Krupal, who will actually be asking live. So he'll be asking more along the lines of how to get ready for a corporate career and set yourself up for success. So whenever you're ready, Krupal, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Angela. It's been amazing listening to what you have to say. I was just wondering, what can kids start doing in high school to prepare for a successful career in the corporate world?
Yeah, I personally think high school is a little too young to start preparing. I didn't even really think about careers until third year. Second year is actually when I went to my first ever corporate event, and that was actually a Deloitte event. So funny how things turned out. I actually would encourage high schoolers to pursue their passions. Like I talked about a little earlier, like pursuing your passions and trying a lot of things out, especially when you're younger and the stakes aren't as high, gives you a lot of choice to pursue something that you're truly passionate about. Instead of thinking like, hey, like I know I want to go into corporate, so I have to do X internship with Y firm. Think about more so like, what am I curious about? What questions do I want to answer in the summer? This can be questions about yourself, or it can be questions about the world, and try to pursue it that way. But if you're more about the let me hardcore prepare for things in the future, then I would just suggest just reach out for an internship. Like Angelia and I talked about earlier, the worst they can say is no. And by reaching out to especially smaller companies that do need those hands, so startups or like mom and pop shops or boutique firms, you have a chance to really make an impact and to do really good work during the summer that then you can share in your interviews or share in your cover letter and bring you to better, greater jobs in the future when you're older and when you're ready.
Sorry, I was on mute. So thank you. And the next question I'm going to ask is from Arnav, who sent it in through Q&A. I think it kind of relates to this. So I'm going to post it. But essentially what he's asking is that with COVID-19, everything is virtual. So do you have any networking tips or just general tips on how young people can get their foot in the door for things like internships?
Yeah. I would say that everything being virtual actually plays out into your favor, because when, like in the before world, in the old normal, I don't know how you want to call it, it was almost easier to reject students by being like, hey, I'm too busy at the office and I can't come down to meet you for whatever. But because everyone's working from home for the most part and everyone has access to a computer, it's really easy to just ask them for a call. Hi, I'm X, I'm a grade X student, and I'm really passionate about consulting. I see that you're a consultant right now. Could you spare 20 minutes for a quick call? When you're asking for these things, whether it's on LinkedIn or through a secondary connection or through your alumni network, approach the ask or structure the ask, in a way that is truthful and realistic. Sometimes students reach out like, hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time to speak about X? And I'm like, 5 minutes is just me and you saying hi and getting to know each other. If you actually want to use a coffee chat wisely to learn about the company, learn about an individual, or request an internship, you have to be upfront about it and you have to be realistic with your ask. By being upfront, essentially being authentic and owning your truth of what you're asking for and what you want out of the discussion, I think it only helps you out in the end as well, because the professional knows what to expect out of it and they can prepare accordingly. I think the worst feeling is when you both feel like you've wasted each other's time, in the sense that maybe you, the student, want the internship, but they have no internship positions, and you leave that discussion to the very end, and the professional walks away feeling like they can't really help you out, and you feel really left out of the process as well. That's just the worst from a personal perspective. But if you go into searching for these internships in a very upfront manner and do the right research, so you appear very competent and committed when you do initial reach out, I think then you would probably see some better results in the end when you're requesting the coffee chats. And then once you're having the virtual coffee chats, try to really get to know them and try to build a relationship. Like I talked about before, a lot of things don't happen overnight or immediately, and you have to be really patient when you're trying to go about it. So build a relationship with the people that you're having coffee chats with, and continue to reach out to see that maybe they can't help you for your sophomore or second year internship, but they can maybe help you out for your third year internship or your full-time job after graduation.
Right. And yeah, I'd love to even chime in on this question. So I think I might have forgotten my intro at the beginning, but I'm probably closer in age to most of the audience. I'm a freshman at Wharton. So I totally want to double everything that Angela's saying, even through COVID, last couple of years. Really in being direct and asking for what you want. I've personally had a lot of success with that. And I think what's really cool is I see a connection to something we were talking about earlier, which is doing what you're passionate about at a young age, right? Because in my experience, a lot of these conversations start with, I'm really passionate about X, and I'd love
Yeah.
to get involved and provide value for your company. And when you have that sort of, a dynamic, I find those conversations to be very compelling, very productive, and in my experience, lead me to the internship or whatever I was looking for out of it.
Yeah, exactly. I would say like very similar for me too. Now that I'm kind of on the other side of this, I have so many messages on LinkedIn, and I respond to everyone, but I do respond to the ones that give me more value first, in the
Right.
sense that I've had some students reach out and be like, hey, I noticed that instructiv is like could do X better on social media. Are you looking for a social media coordinator? And also, do you want to have a chat with me? Or for example, like, hey, I noticed that you actually have a typo and whatever, because I kind of have dyslexia, so that happens a lot. When they do that, that actually makes me feel like they're contributing a lot to my life and they're helping me out. So of course, I also want to help them out as well. Some of my mentees literally just stem from random LinkedIn and Instagram interactions, and now we have each other's numbers and we text and I give them help all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's so awesome, and I hope that that resonates for some people in the audience, because I know it's hard to get your first internship, first job. So I hope that's helpful, and I'm glad we touched on that topic. So we also have I'm just scrolling through the Q&A, and we have a ton of questions, more about consulting. So let's pick one. So we have one an anonymous question about let's answer that. What do consulting firms look for during the application process? Are good grades a huge factor when filtering out candidates?
Grades are not a huge factor when you're ready to make it to the recruiting team, in the sense that there's almost 2 levels of screenings for at least my firm. I'm not sure how things are at some of the other firms, but to even make it in front of me, the hiring manager for my team, you have to be screened past HR. And HR looks for completeness of your application, and also if you meet a minimum standard. So for example, if your grade is below a certain threshold, then it might not even make it to me, unless I've already talked to you before and you made a really strong impression and I go searching for you in the system. So I think I just want to touch on that very quickly, in the sense that grades are not as important as you might think they are in differentiating you. It's more so your experiences. The second, like the power of networking is huge. There were many times where there was an applicant that I've spoken to and other people on my team have spoken to, but their written application wasn't really good, except they made an extremely strong impression on us when they were having these informational interviews or these coffee chats, that we actually went looking for them. And we brought them into the interview regardless, because we believed so much in their potential, and they ended up interning. So in that sense, I think that definitely, like, you must network now in this day and age. I did a Deloitte takeover a couple of days ago, and I shared that I didn't network. I truly think that if I was recruiting now, I wouldn't even stand a chance because of the caliber of the applications that are coming in and all of the extra things that everyone is doing in order to get on the team's radars. And I think to address the previous part of the question that you asked, definitely like what we're looking for on your written application for your resume is unfortunately like your school does kind of matter in a sense that it separates you into different buckets. We have target schools and non-target schools. I actually fell into a non-target school because I was coming in from the States to Canada. And then afterwards, of course, we look at your professional experiences. So what have you done in the past that is similar to consulting or actually consulting? That includes pro bono stuff or other internships that you've had at boutique firms. And then we look at your leadership experiences because, like I said before, teamwork, leadership, ownership are three very critical skills for consultants to have. And then finally, we also really want to double check your story and how you can fit well into the firm and what you bring to the table and going a layer deeper than the bullets that you already have on your resume. So we do, at least in my team, really pay attention to the cover letter as well to understand who are you as a person? Why do you want to be on our team? What can you really bring to the table? And do we actually feel that culture fit and that commitment from you? If we go back to the 3C framework that I've been talking about, your resume is very much your competence. And then your cover letter is very much your commitment and your culture fit. So a lot of people discount the cover letter and similarly the behavioral interview because they think it isn't as important as a resume or the case. But in my very humble opinion, I think that's wrong because one C belongs to the case and the resume. The other two C's really belongs to the cover letter and the behavioral interviews. That was a very, very quick explainer of what we look for. I actually have a couple of Instagram carousels on Join Instructive. If you go there, you can see exactly like what skills that I'm looking for and other hiring managers are looking for consultants.
Right. And we have another question coming in from Aaron, who I think kind of branches off a little bit off of what we're talking about. And it's more specific to interviews. How can applicants make a strong impression during interviews?
Yeah, I would say, so for case or for behavioral, because they're a little different. Or if it's not specified, I can very quickly talk about both.
Maybe let's start with behavioral because I imagine there's connections between behavioral interviews in various companies. Is that true?
Yes, let's do that. So for behavioral interviews, the number one thing that we're looking for is essentially like, how do you sell yourself and your story? So this very much goes down to, do you have a very perfected and polished, like why consulting, why X firm, why X office, why X team, like as specific as it goes, because we want to ensure that it's you who really wants us and we really want you back. And that highlights the commitment portion, right? Like we want to only be hiring people who we think are sure to accept the offer and would be super happy on this team. It's a long-term commitment, so on and so forth. And in your behavioral interview as well, make sure that you can really go deep into the various examples that you're asked about and you're actually addressing the question that they are asking. I've seen some interviewees mess up, unfortunately, because they were so nervous and they thought I asked for one thing when I actually asked for another. And the rubrics, unfortunately, for behavioral interviews are quite tough, especially during the first round when we really have to be weeding out people. So if we don't answer it, that's your only chance, and that's just very much bad luck. When you are answering the questions, you want to be answering, of course, with the STAR method. So you want to give a little bit of context, talk about what you in particular did. Not we, not us, not the organization, but me, I, sometimes my organization if you are the leader and the founder. So talk about what you specifically can bring to the table. And on top of all of that, you want to be doing it in a very structured way. So I always tell my mentees to go about the STAR and then also to maybe list things off. Like firstly, I did X, then I did Y, and then that resulted in blank. And finally, this was the end result. By making it as easy as possible for the interviewers to follow along, the more they can really like mark you off against a rubric, and also understand what you're saying. Because I do find that interviewees, again, because they're so nervous in the interviews, they tend to like miss words, or they think they said something. So a big piece of context is missing. But the easier you make it for us to follow along with your structure and your conciseness, the more that we can understand what you're trying to say and what you can actually bring to the table.
Right. Thank you for that very comprehensive review on that. And do you have any other advice on how? So we have another question in about how to build competency. So do you have any tangible suggestions on building this competency? What are the actual skills and knowledge that you need to be seen as competent?
Yes. So once you're in the job, building competencies really just comes from going heads down and doing the work. Like, don't slack off, don't cut corners, ask for help, but more so in help of how do I do this, not can you do this for me? Because more practice that you have in building slides and analyzing data and creating the storyboard and storytelling itself, the better you get at actually doing it in practice. I think there's, unfortunately, I haven't found it yet, but there's no shortcut for the power of hard work and good work, especially when you're trying to learn about a profession from the ground up. And taking a step back, if we're talking about building competency, so you seem competent when you're trying to get into consulting, then that comes from finding adjacent to consulting opportunities, like I talked about when we're talking about the application. So for example, pro bono consulting, or being a president at your student club, or interning at a startup, or interning at a Fortune 500, so on and so forth. By essentially thinking about the core skills that consultants have. And again, you can refer to my post on my Instagram, which I will then link in the chat later on. You'll understand like, okay, there's really only like 7 to 8, max 10 core skills that you need, as long as you make sure that all of them are legitimately embedded into your experiences, into the stories that you can tell, into your cover letter and your resume, then you're probably perfectly set up for consulting recruitment and also for excelling as a consultant once you get the role.
Awesome. And before we close off, I'd love to get a feel for the audience and what their interests are, so we can give the best materials and advice towards the end. So what, for the attendants watching, what do you want from this webinar, and what are you hoping for afterwards? So far I'm seeing that the majority do want to become a consultant, and the rest seem to be inspired and want to explore the business world even more. And then we have some people who are interested in building their own business. So let's attack the first two. For people who want to become a consultant, what is the next step in how they can get started in their journey? Do you have any materials to support them? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think that, yes, definitely I have materials to support you. So number one, I just dropped the Instagram onto the chat. So definitely go there and follow and see the posts that I have. Number two, I actually have a lot of resources from the Instructive Network. So go to the website. I think Anuja dropped the link, yes, there. So you can go and look, and you can understand how do you actually take the current experience that you have, take your current internship, and then re-recruit for consulting and set you up stronger. I would say definitely the last thing is take full advantage of your alumni network, of what your school can provide you, and also what your student organizations can provide you. A lot of my case prep, a lot of my behavioral interview prep, resume reviews, whatever, it all came from alumni that graduated from the International Impact Consulting Organization that I was running. So if I didn't have them, I probably wouldn't be here today. And it's super important to be reaching out to people who can help you out. I also do limited one-on-one sessions sometimes if I have time. So I will send out an email to all of the registrants actually tonight or tomorrow morning with all of these different links so you can try and make the best of your summer to make sure you are prepared for consulting recruitment in the fall. The last thing I will mention is that if you're going for MBB full-time, the applications are actually due in 3 days. So make sure you don't miss out on the opportunity. For the other big fours, we typically recruit later in August or September, so you have a little bit more time to prepare.
Perfect. And I'm getting a notification that Zoom is going to kick us out in a minute. So in the chat, you should see the link to Angela's site. We will be sending out emails to get you all the resources that you need. And for those who are interested in running your own business, the call to action there would be to check out mystartupdojo.com, which is an organization that I run to help young people build their own businesses. And last week, we even had a teenpreneur who was on Dragon's Den. So this is national TV going out to 30 million Canadians. We had a 14-year-old on that show. So if you are one of the people who answered yes to the build your own business question, check out mystartupdojo.com. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. Most of all, thank you to Angela, and thank you to the incredible team behind the scenes, Mia, Anuja, Noor, for helping put together this awesome event. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you again, Angela, and thank you to our audience.
Thanks for having me, and I hope this was